One of the ways you've just been thinking about this and talking about student wellness is in terms of problems, and I want to suggest a different, not orthogonal, but a different way of thinking about it, which is that to think about this partially in terms of how do we teach well, and to make the point that when we're talking about these connections to students, and we're talking about not something that's orthogonal to our teaching, but it's something that's very much part and parcel with the kinds of teaching goals we all have. And I'm going to start by recalling for you a discussion I had with a group of faculty. Many of you know that I'm part of faculty conversations about teaching quite frequently, and one of these discussions a few years ago was striking because the faculty were talking about what happened in their undergraduate experience that led them to become faculty members. And every single person in the room, some of whom may be in the room right now actually, every single person in the room at that point said it was because somebody that was a faculty member had reached out to them and expressed confidence in their ability to succeed in the field. Even in a field, frankly, where some of those folks said they weren't sure they were doing so great. And the reason I wanted to start there is partly because I wanted to say that what I'm talking about today shouldn't come as a surprise to any of you. A lot of what I'm going to talk about are things I've heard from, in fact, many of you. And what I really want to do is call your attention to things that you may already be thinking about or know in the back of your mind. But the other reason I want to start there is because I think it's a really useful reminder that effective teaching that's really transformative for our students, includes finding ways to connect with our students. It includes recognizing our students' strengths, it includes recognizing our students' needs, and figuring out how to reach out to them. In other words, all the kinds of things that we've been talking about today is part and parcel of how you're thinking about effective teaching. And again, this isn't something that you don't know. I'm sure all of you know that when you go to teach your subject, you're not just teaching your subject, you're teaching the people in the room. And I know that's something you think about when you're thinking about how do you make your field accessible, right? We all have one picture of our field in our heads, but we've got to think about who our students are when we think about how we present it. I know that's something you think about when you're imagining what is it that novices need to learn. And I know that's something you're thinking about when you're thinking about what skills do they bring to the table already that they can use to learn, what skills do I need to teach them given where they are at that moment. And what I'm suggesting, and what I think we're suggesting in this session, is also to remember that we're not just teaching our subjects, but we're teaching people when we're thinking about the students in our class who are struggling. And I would add, actually, when we're thinking about the students in our class who are thriving, because they don't necessarily know they're thriving either. But for the purposes of our conversation today, when we're thinking about the students that are struggling, when we're thinking about how we're interacting with students, not just as students, but as individual people. And, I think it usefully reminds us, or it's useful for us to remember that the students who are in our class, the ones who may be struggling, are often doing so for reasons that are completely unrelated to their abilities, that are completely unrelated, frankly, to their inclinations, that may be unrelated to what we're doing in class entirely. And it's a useful reminder, I think, to keep in mind that often the reason students are struggling in our classes have to do with external factors that are maybe entirely invisible to us, some of which may relate to our class. I mean, we do have students that struggle because they question whether other people think they belong in this class, and they're asking, is this right for me, or more importantly, do other people think this is wrong, the wrong class for me? And some students struggle, because they may be entirely capable of being missing a part of the background material or background preparation. But then some of the reasons that students may be struggling in our class, and again, this is worth remembering, think about where they are as people, have to do with things that have nothing to do with the class, right? They may be struggling because of something that's going on at home. They may be struggling because they're working long hours for financial remuneration that they need. They may be struggling because they're trying to figure out about how they fit into Penn. And that is, they may be struggling with all sorts of things that have to do with being human beings, as well as being students. And again, I know I'm not saying anything you don't already know, and you're not already thinking about. But it's worth underscoring, it's worth noting, there's a lot of research out there of what makes for successful students and where students can be that suggests that for students, their sense of belonging in an institution, their sense of belonging in a field, their sense of belonging in a class, that sense of belonging makes a real difference for their academic success. And it's actually striking that you can get, for students, if there is a sense that a person, a faculty member, or an institution values them not just as a student, but as a person, you can see improved performance, improved learning. There's a study that was actually particularly had a minor detail. It said, you ask a student at the beginning of the class to identify places in their lives where they overcome struggle. So the kind of thing we want them to do in our classes, but in their lives, not in an academic setting, but if you ask them to identify that, just at the beginning of the class, you can see a difference in the way for some students they approach that class and the way and the learning outcomes. And again, I'm not pushing you all to adopt that, but I'm suggesting that that recognition of how students are as people plays an incredible role in how they thrive academically as well. So if we want to see students succeed to the best ability, their abilities, and I haven't met any faculty who don't want that, but if we want to see students really succeed to the best of their abilities, we need to think about these kinds of questions. And we need to think about how do we connect with students, how do we spot their needs, and how do we support them. Now, I imagine for all of you that raises some really basic questions. How to reach out to students. And this is really difficult, I know, when you're in a really large class, for instance. Figuring out what do students need, how do you identify that? It's really difficult, frankly, because I know some folks would say, figuring out how to reach out to students without feeling like you're stigmatizing them. I know that's a real challenge folks feel. So if we have more time, I would say it would be worth us taking a few moments to think about how you do that. But I think as you're thinking about your own roles, thinking about that as a conversation for yourselves, but also for your colleagues, about how do you reach out to students is an important one. Certainly today, you've been hearing, we've just had a discussion about lots of ways Penn can provide support once we've reached out, and there are an abundance of resources in place to help your students. One of the things in your packet is the TA guide that we give to new TAs, which is in your packet because in the center it's got a guide to student resources, in which, in answer to Jeff's earlier question, we have tried to simplify for things TAs who they should contact. There are an abundance of places, but the message that we're trying to give them is here are some of the key things to keep in mind. It may be useful for you to know the messages that the TAs who go through TA training get, but also that may be a useful handout for yourselves as well. So all of this is to suggest one of the roles as instructors, I'm sure you think about here, is how do you make connections for students, connect them to various resources. The Faculty Council on Access and Academic Support, which some of you are members, spend a good deal of time thinking about what's the baseline information we wish all faculty had. And they boiled that down to a 5-point document, which is also in your folder. But the real message was to know that students are sometimes their success is based on factors outside of their aptitude, and to understand where you can go to connect them for support. And that group said, look, let's simplify it. Here we go. Let's connect them to the advising office. We know there are a lot of other places, but the advising offices will get them to the right place. As I say, that's in your handout as well, in your folder as well. Another way you might be thinking about this kind of question is not just how do you take advantage of all these resources, but also what do you do in your own class? And do we need to rethink what happens in our classes to help students facilitate making connections with faculty and help students recognize that this kind of support exists? And I think that's another good question for you to think back and talk to your colleagues about the ways we structure our classes. I certainly know that some of you are already engaged in that thinking. I know that some of you are engaged in thinking about how can I build assignments that really challenge my students? But if I'm going to really challenge them, that means I need to build in the places where they get guidance, and the places where they get feedback, and the places where they get support to take on those challenges. I know some of you are thinking about how do I structure my class so that I know throughout the semester where my students are, and I'm not waiting for a few major milestone points, but that I can get that feedback and see, and hopefully my students can get a realistic appraisal of how they're doing. So again, there's also a handout in your packet about inclusive teaching practices. It's designed to think about inclusion of a wider range of students, but I think some of the practices there relate to some of these questions as well, so I want to let you know about that as additional. All of this, all of what I'm talking about, requires taking a proactive approach. Many of you have talked to me about office hours and saying, if I simply wait for people to come into office hours, I'm super happy to help them, but I know that some of the people who most need to be there will never come. And I know that reaching out and being proactive with the students here is kind of a loaded thing. I mean, on one hand, it seems like a no-brainer, but on the other hand, all of us want to treat our students as adults. And we want to recognize that our students make choices, and we don't want to ignore that. At the same time, it's also true that study after study has shown that the human connection students form, particularly with faculty, and they don't even have to be really deep connections, but even the passive connections that students form with faculty are really transformative for our students. And certainly the group of faculty in the teaching discussion I mentioned at the beginning understood that well. Again, I was amazed that every single person had that experience. So if we want to have that transformative impact, if we want to really reach our students, then I think we need to think about reaching out to the students, even the students who may not seek it out. And those may be the students who are going to benefit more than we imagine. Well, as I say, I know you've got other folks to talk to, but I wanted to at least take a moment to remind us that what we're talking about here is part of the goals that we all share in thinking about our teaching at large.
And I just want to say that the materials in your folder in particular are sort of the tip of the iceberg in terms of the kinds of resources that the Center for Teaching and Learning can provide you, your departments, your schools. And so given that sort of glimpse, you have a sense of what Bruce and his group can provide you. Thank you very much, Bruce.
You come to engineering often and conduct workshops,
Yes.
but they're usually on things that are happening to transmit material in the classroom effectively, that is didactic material in various forms. But I would like to put out that this is something that, since they're all faculty conversations, that this topic in each of the schools, it would be an important workshop. It's atypical, but something on this idea of connecting with the students not necessarily in the material of the course.
Yeah, do you want?
Sure, please. John, please.
Yeah. First of all, yes, and thank you. I mean, frankly, we're always looking for what should be appropriate topic, so that's useful in general. It's certainly something that we have on our radar screen and we're thinking about for fall conversations. And so I think it's an important one. It's something that there are lots of ways of getting at. So in engineering, for instance, in the past year, one of the questions that faculty really want to talk about is, how do I help my students feel okay about struggle? Which is, you're suggesting we think about this much more directly, but I think there are lots of ways into this kind of a conversation. And it was really, the engineering conversation about how do we help faculty think about struggle was pretty striking. And I think it's a conversation that a lot of faculty at a lot of places are engaged in, but I do think you're right, so that we can think about how we can have this more general conversation on this topic.
Great. Thank you, Bruce.
Yeah.
I raised this question this morning. This was, for the larger classes, the TAs are like our ears and eyes of what the students are doing, and I think your program kind of does a lot of the TA training.
Yes.
And is there like a best practice thing for, so do the TAs actually learn how to sense the signs of a distressed student, for example, and other best practices on how to sort of basically act as a pipeline, right? Because you want that information to reach the faculty member.
Right.
And so that's just...
Yeah, Rob, you cut me off. because you got to do
Sure,
it.
sure.
So maybe it's useful to say what we do for TAs. So not all TAs go through TA training. The vast majority of arts and sciences TAs do. I think it's about half of the engineering TAs now do. Yeah, and we get a smidgen from Wharton's. We get the nursing TAs, but we get mostly the doctoral students. We don't, or in some cases we get master's students. In many cases we do not, and we don't get undergraduate TAs in this program. What we do relative to this is we give TAs a series of choose your own adventures where they are presented with a student who falls asleep in class. And we ask the TAs to think about what are you going to do, and then we bring up some of the people you've already met to talk about what kind of resources exist on campus, and helps TAs guide them through how they make their choices. And we let them vote with clickers so that it kind of is fun, and then we see, based on their vote, where we go next. The idea is to get them to think about what resources exist in the context in which they would use them. Whether that gives them a sense of best practices and a sense of how to be sensitive to that, I can't speak across the board. What I can say is the college has told us that since we started doing TA training in this respect, the use of course problem notices has gone up considerably. So TAs have been more alive to the idea that this is a useful mechanism for communication.
Can I make actually a little plug, because I think part of the meeting is to share ideas.
Yeah.
I think we underestimate actually the power of Canvas. So like I lock my site down and you can't open it until you've read like there's resources out there to help, or there's hotline numbers. And then I put a timed reminder, like announcement, because I get overwhelmed like everybody. I'm like, oh my goodness, it's almost midterms. So when I'm thoughtful, I put a time reminder for the next semester, thinking of you, remember, here's the hotline, and it goes off when I least remember in advance. So I think we underestimate a lot of the technology. There's different ways people learn. There's different ways people hear the information. I get up every day in the class, I say, I'm here, everyone okay? But they may not hear me. Some people like text or whatever. So Canvas actually is really, really awesome to augment some of that interpersonal and supplement. So that's my little plug, and it's actually worked very well.